Welcome in once again, everybody, to another edition of the Voice of Camp Nathanael, coming at you right here on the campus of Camp Nathanael in Emelina, Kentucky. My name is Stephen Bell, and with me, as always, is and I hope I'm going to get this word right. I hope I'm going to pronounce it right. I fear that I'm not going to be able to, but hey, anyway, I'm committed to it now.
All right, I'm on the edge of my seat.
The Beborgment, I didn't pronounce it right. The Beborgmic. It's spelled Borborygmic. Beborgmic. Anyway, that's your cue.
This is Lee Sharp, guys, and I don't know if I'm supposed to be smiling or scowling at this word.
If you look it up, the definition is related to the sound a stomach makes. So, of all the sounds, I mean...
You know what? We set the bar low, all right?
We did.
As long as I can sound better than the sounds that a stomach makes, then I feel like I've achieved something today.
Oh, man. Hey, I don't know how often you guys have been listening to the Voice of Camp Nathanael. If this is your first time, if there's ever been a time to go back and relive some episodes, I would encourage you to head back to June, and I'm going to tell you why here in just a second, all right? So in the two that we had this past June, you're going to want to go back and listen to those, and that's going to give some context as to where we're going today. But before we get into that, we got some major events going on at camp here, like as soon as like this coming weekend.
Yes. So when this episode is premiering, we've got a few of our weekend overnights happening. Those are from Friday evening to Saturday afternoon. And they are set. We've got 3 weekends in a row. 2 of them are for 4th and 5th grade. Those are October 18th and 19th, and then 25th and 26th. Mm-hmm. And then we've got another one on November 1st and 2nd for 6th through 8th grade. So those first 2 are for 4th through 5th. The next ones are through 6th through 8th. You can get all of that information at campnathanael.org. You can find that on our Facebook. And what happens during those overnights, essentially, we try to take an entire week's worth of camp, and we do our best to cram it into less than 24 hours.
If you have never been to a week of camp, all right, and I'm totally serious. If you've never been to a week of camp, if you have contemplated coming to a week of camp during the summer at Camp Nathanael, weekend overnights, these are a great opportunity for you to kind of get a feel as to what camp is like, mm-hmm. and know that you can experience that for an entire week.
Yes, and we can't cram everything in there, obviously. We only have so much time, but we do our absolute best to just stick as many different activities and great food, and since it's fall, we'll probably have some bonfire stuff going if mm-hmm. the weather's going nice, and it'll just be a ton of fun. So again, that's 4th and 5th grade on October 18th and 19th, and then 25th and 26th, and then 6th through 8th grade on November 1st and 2nd. The cost for that is just $20, which is pretty good. I'm just throwing that number out there. I don't know how many different events you can show up to for $20 to stay overnight, get fed for 3 different meals there, and have all the different activities that are happening. So that's coming up soon. If you are not already signed up, know that those weekends, not to scare you, but they get filled up really quick.
Up fast. They do.
So if you are just now hearing this and you're thinking, oh no, go on and hop on the website, hop on the registration, get plugged in there because they fill up fast.
That's right. So we've talked about overnights, the weekend conferences here, and that's going to lead into our guest. And like I said, it goes back to June. Why would I say go back and listen in June?
It's all our history episodes.
It's our history episodes. And guess who's back, Lee?
Roy Hodson.
Mr. Roy Hodson, welcome back to the program, sir.
The old man of the mountain, I guess. I just have one question, Stephen.
Yes.
That word that you described, Lee, is that from your Wheel of Fortune days? Is that the winning word that you came up with?
Listen, how do you pronounce that? I mean, I tried to look it up, the pronunciation of it, and I don't even know if Google knows at this point. But
I have no clue.
But no, not from the Wheel of Fortune days. But Roy, listen, man, it is so good to have you back in. We so enjoy everything that you bring to the episodes of Voice of the Camp Nathanael, talking about the history, and we said we were going to kind of key in here or relate the weekend conferences, because the last time you were here, you kind of brought us up to probably mid to late 40s, approaching 1950.
Correct.
Right through there, and it really we kind of pick back up with the start of those weekend conferences, right?
Actually, yes. Actually, the weekend conferences date back to the early 40s, actually.
Okay.
And talk about roughing it. The first ones were held in a home that Margaret Sproul, one of our workers at the time, had at A Cup over in Perry County. The high school students would literally get on the train as far away as Buckhorn. They would ride, or actually they got on at Chavy's, I guess. They'd ride the train to Vico, and then they'd pick them up, and they'd go to Miss Sproul's house. The girls slept in the house, and Miss Sproul and I guess maybe some of the mission folks invested, and they created or converted a chicken coop into a cabin for the boys. And I don't think it was heated, so these were early fall things. But that was in about 1942, and as she changed her living location, Miss Sproul, that's when the decision was made to move the overnights. They were called, overnights then too, to Camp Nathanael. But that also involved, because at that point there were no heated cabins at Camp Nathanael. So they began to, that's when the cabins that existed, which was Peru and Israel, and maybe India was built by that time. They put heat in those so that they could have these overnight retreats. Wow. And so, that's where that outreach to students really began, and it has continued. You talk about $20 being a bargain.
Yeah.
When I arrived here in the 70s, the grade schooler was $3. 3 and 5.
Inflation is a real thing, guys.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, and it's all about the psychology of it in one sense. As we kept the price low because we thought that was helpful.
Yeah.
So we didn't, attendance actually began to drop. And so I don't remember who made the suggestion. It wasn't me, but somebody made the suggestion that maybe because it is so inexpensive, they don't think it's worth it. And so we actually raised the price at that point. It went up to 10. This was probably in the 90s, $10, and attendance picked back up. You explain the psychology of that. Yeah. But looking back, you see what it is. While 20 is still a bargain, in one sense, it's worth every dime of that $20 to come and spend a weekend here at Camp Nathanael.
Yeah, absolutely. It is the psychology behind it is really weird because you make it too cheap and then people don't come.
Yep.
And then you increase it and all of a sudden you get your numbers back and it just shows. I guess it just shows value. It shows value, right?
Yeah, it does. So. It does. And the other thing that began in the 40s that has also grown and become in my view, one of the best outreaches of the summer is the Family Week. It began actually in the early 40s as well. In the 1940s here, nobody went anywhere overnight like that.
Yeah.
But the staff had experiences in other Bible conferences on the East Coast or, the Midwest, and they thought that is something that adults especially, because at the time the focus was on students, on children, and they wanted to find a way to reach adults. So they began to offer this to families. I don't know what the attendance was in the early days, but it was pretty much an out-of-the-box thinking to have that take place. And then, of course, it continued at the time we arrived in the 70s. It was called the Adult Bible Conference. And there were maybe 15 children, and the rest were adults.
Gotcha.
Well, unless it's changed, the demographics of that of Family Week, and then the name was changed from Adult Bible Conference to Family Week. It took on a whole different flavor and ministry focus, which, from my point of view, was what was needed, and so, but yeah, and then the facilities grew to accommodate what was taking place.
Right.
So some of these things, when they were started, like the retreats, the Adult Bible Conference, we're again coming back to that theme from back in June. the staff here, the workers here were always looking for a new way, a different way to create ministry.
Mm-hmm.
And, sounds like, you read the history, nothing was off the table as far as what they were willing to try. Did everything continue? Was everything successful? No.
Right.
But they'd try it for a while, and then they would, it would kind of back off. And, I had a missionary tell me on the farm field, he said they would try something. If it didn't work, they'd shoot it in the head and try something else. That was his terminology. He was from West Virginia. And they had that approach. Again, a lot of the things were ahead of their time for what was taking place.
You talked about the Family Bible Conference. I think it was back in February when we were doing the shows, and we pulled out some of the old reels that are up in the archives.
Yes,
and one of those clips was of Garland Franklin coming back during the Bible conference, which I believe was early 70s. I
think it was in the 70s.
Like 1972, somewhere through there, because it was like the 40-year anniversary of camp.
Yes.
And we've got him speaking on those episodes back in February, which was really cool.
And what has always fascinated me is I've looked back over the speaker list. Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't know what contacts Mr. Franklin had, but he obviously had some, and others did as well. I mean, we're talking about nationally known conference speakers.
Yeah.
Harry Ironside spoke here at Camp Nathanael, who was longtime pastor of Moody Bible Church, has a whole series of commentaries.
Wow.
Trying to think of some of the other large, well-known national names that came and spoke that exposed them to this ministry, as well as, our folks here hearing that quality type speaker, which was really something. But, it's, as I think about the weekend stuff, as I said earlier, there was a time when there was only a few weekends in the fall, a few weekends in the spring when camp was used. But then as some of us began to think, this would have been in the late 80s, early 90s, thereabouts, we began to see there's all kinds of opportunities, which is when the couples retreat began, which is when senior citizens began. Eva Ludgard and Alma Hebert came to me one day and said, there's these senior citizen centers around here. Do you think we could have something for that? And I said, well, you organize it. We'll try to do it. And the first one that we had was actually in the chapel. There was probably 60 people here, from mostly not in Perry County. Mm-hmm. And I think Ralph Bauer, one of our former workers, was the speaker that particular time. It was just one session. That was it.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not sure what it is today, but it morphed into 2 days of 100 and some people each day, that just continued to grow.
Yeah, it's still we're still there. This past year, I think one day I think we had right around 80 somewhere through there, and we're doing it a couple of days in April there, but it's still the response to it is still great.
I mean, again, an aspect of the community that wasn't being reached in a formal way, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
The couples retreat, the senior citizens, and then of course the big one. And looking back over the podcast this fall, you did one with Rick and Kathy about outdoor ed.
Yep.
That began as a nugget in the minds of Bob and Carol Murr and my wife Debbie, who saw what was here. They all had an interest in nature and in God's creation, and thought, why not? And we just last week we finished that up and saw roughly about 3,000 kids on campus over the course of 5 weeks, which was crazy. Exactly, and it had some growing pains over the years, but it would when it first began, they not only had a fall program, they did 2 or 3 weeks in the spring as
Woo.
well. And finally, some people realized that was a little more than we could handle, along with the couples retreat, the senior citizen day, the spring overnights. So it all became consolidated in the fall. And I don't know what Rick and Kathy said, but one of the comments that I remember hearing at the time, one teacher made the comment that coming here outdoes the Children's Museum in Lexington.
Wow.
And I thought that was, and obviously it was a lot of hard work, but, you know, the quality of the program has continued. Of course, when Bob and Carol stepped down, Rick and Kathy took over that leadership. And so it's been a huge outreach. As you said, over 3,000 students here.
And it's so in depth and so well put together. Everything from the schedule to the it's amazing how you can take a theme and have so many different aspects to that theme. And we were talking about just last time how important our volunteers are that come in for something like that. I mean, it's just it is really incredible at how well that gets done.
Yeah. No, it really is.
It's planned with hands. The idea is hands-on learning.
Yeah, for sure.
The idea is that the kids are going to get some dirt under their fingernails.
Yep.
And when they were here for Pioneer Days, there was a station set up where they were doing butter making, and they had milk in a jar, and the kids were shaking the jar.
Yep.
And during that station there, and lo and behold, at the end of that, the time they had at that station, there was butter in the jar,
butter. Yeah.
and the kids had got to try it, and that's part of the experience of outdoor ed, is that it's not just, oh, you're going to read about it in a book.
Yeah.
And you know in theory that it works. It's, no, we're going to do it live and in front of you. We are going to prove a fact that you can, in fact, make butter out of milk and a jar by shaking it, really. And you end up with a pretty good product in the end.
Yeah.
And then the same with all the other activities where you're going around and you're seeing the different animals, or you're trying out some of the farming equipment, or you're doing like it lets you get your hands, again, get some dirt under your fingernails and actually see that learning happens, and it's you don't just read about it, you can actually do it.
You talk about that butter workshop. I led that butter workshop.
Did you really?
Yeah, that was pretty fascinating, actually, when you think about it.
It was pretty fun.
It was unsalted.
Yeah.
Right.
But I know that like when I think it was during some of the lunches during the event.
Yeah, we ate some of the butter,
some of the butter.
Yeah.
Like we would put it on some bread or potatoes or different stuff. It was really good.
Yeah, and you know, it was amazing to watch how a facility that for actually at one point the summer was 10 weeks long.
Man,
From
wow.
10 weeks just in the summer primarily, and a few weekends, to where, as you were commenting before we began to record, Lee, almost every weekend there was something taking place on this facility. God had given this facility, it doesn't need to sit idle all the time.
No.
Yeah,
And
for sure.
sometimes it can be a little you feel overwhelmed, but at the same time, God's getting his money's worth, I guess.
Yeah.
What I'm saying.
So where do we go from here, Roy?
Well, there's, another thing that had a huge impact on the ministry. Well, two things I'd like to touch on today is the Vacation Bible School ministry. Again, these two ladies, Eva Ludgard and Alma Hebert, saw a need, and others did as well, that while we got several hundred kids here for a week in summer, there were thousands of kids across the region that didn't have that opportunity. And yet they still needed to hear the gospel. And so Miss Hebert and Miss Eva began doing community vacation Bible schools. And they would go into a community, get permission sometimes from the school board to use a school building, and they began to have these Bible schools. Well, they discovered that all the professionally done ones, at the time several Christian publishers were publishing, one, it was too expensive for what they had. Two, it didn't really meet the region. It was a suburban material, not an rural material. And so Alma and Eva began to create their own, and they would mimeograph it. And Alma would create visuals, flashcards, and all this kind of stuff. And they would do as many as 50 and 60 Bible schools in a summer. And
how does that even?
well, the trick is you do 2 a day.
2 a day.
You do one in the morning,
Ah.
then you pack it all up, and you go to another location and do it in the afternoon.
Okay.
You pack it up, you come. And when we first came,
Still,
Debbie,
that's a lot, man.
It is.
as a summer staff person, 2 summers before we were married, Debbie was involved in that about usually one rotation a summer, because they would farm out some of the summer staff to the vacation Bible schools, because it grew to where they were probably doing close to 100.
Yeah, and this is going on simultaneously with summer camp.
Summer camp.
Yeah.
And so, I remember one year Debbie was over in the Cumberland Line Fork area, the Cumberland, Harlan County, Line Fork, Electric County, and did 2 a day, and stayed with the worker over there. And it was exhausting to put it
for
bluntly.
sure.
And it was a full 3-hour program. It wasn't like it was,
Wow.
an hour and move on. And they did that all summer. But that ministry continued to grow. And then local churches began to say, can we use that material? Can we? And so I think it was in the late 50s, early 60s, the leadership here made the decision to print it professionally here.
Yeah.
So the first purchase was an offset printing press. And you can talk to Dan Plitt. He's the one who was one of the first operators of that press. He and Barb had just come in about that time. They trained him on it. And so they began to print their Vacation Bible School material.
Would that have been in like the basement of the chapel here?
No,
Is that where
actually,
they would have had that?
No,
Okay.
not yet.
Not yet. Okay.
Okay.
If you've been to campus, the bottom of the chapel is essentially the office area.
Right.
And the front part of the chapel, it's all renovated and it looks really nice for all the offices and whatnot. And then you walk into the back part and you can see where they had some of where I guess eventually some of the printing stuff
It was
moved.
a whole print shop.
I assumed that's where it started, but apparently I'm
It
mistaken.
actually started in the wing of the chapel above the garage door area is where it was originally.
Okay.
And they began to print that, and then they printed other materials as well, but primarily the Vacation Bible School material. And that grew into really a national outreach. Barb Plitt could tell you the exact numbers, but in my memory, they were shipping hundreds of orders, maybe approaching 1,000 orders in a season all across this country.
Wow.
And for a number of years, the area where the office you used to have downstairs or have it, that's where the VBS material all was.
Okay.
And but then our workers would use that material as well. Local churches would come in, and for a number of years, it was a big part of the ministry.
Very cool.
And so over time, other materials were out there. Even our local churches were exposed to other options and other ways of creating Vacation Bible School.
Mm-hmm.
And so the interest began to wane. And instead of soldiering on, the decision was made that it was time to phase it out. And it did.
And so how long did that ministry continue?
Well, that ministry was probably a 50-year ministry.
Wow, really?
From 1950 until the early 2000s. Maybe, I'm not sure exactly.
And
Wow, so it was
when we were digging out, you talk about going into the attic of the chapel and digging out reels. In the same room that we've got all of those old reels stored is
a lot of the VBS.
There are complete sets up there of the VBS materials and probably some of the stuff that they were taking around and setting up 50 times a summer.
They had
That's
they
incredible.
had big satchels that they would carry the visuals in, and they would have, each satchel would have a little American flag and a little Christian flag to do the pledges. And they would have, I forget how many of those packets they would prepare. And then Friends of the Mission, like, they had craft projects. One year, I think they were using Clorox bottles to do something. So Friends of the Mission would collect these Clorox bottles and bring them here or ship them here. And then our workers would already have the materials to do the craft project or whatever. I know Miss Alma would make hundreds of those plaster plaques that you paint.
Yeah.
She would work all winter making those things because that was one of the crafts. So it was it was a tremendous ministry. And during its whole history, it probably reached 2 to 3 times the amount of kids that came to camp.
That summer
every
camp does,
year.
yeah.
Every year.
Wow.
And, thousands of kids that wouldn't have been exposed to the gospel, to Christian teaching in that type of context. So, the VBS had such an impact. And, many, many people were impacted with that. So, and then the other one that I think is well worth mentioning is the high school outreach.
Yeah.
Again, in the late 40s, early 50s, a man by the name of Paul Smith saw that we were reaching grade school kids, which most of the schools then were up to 8th grade, and then they went on to high school. But nobody was going to high school, into the high school. So he put together a team of 3, a musician, himself, I forget, there was 3 of them, 2 ladies and him, and they began to travel a circuit in the high schools of a once-a-month assembly type program, and that continued right down through the generations.
Was that once a month for each high school, or was that one high school a month?
No, that was once a month for each high school.
Okay.
So they were doing, it was the
That is
same,
a lot.
It was the same program, but they would go 3 or 4 days a week, and they would reach probably 20 high schools.
Well, I was getting ready to say, how many high schools are we talking about at that time?
At the time here, even in Knott County where camp is, there was a high school at Caney, there was a high school at Cordy, there was a high school in Hyman, there was a high school Car Creek. So it was at least 4 in this county.
Yeah, that's true.
And so each county probably had at least 4. So they would take that length of time. And of course, down through the years, names that some folks will recognize, Dennis Klein took the leadership of that, and then Bob Murr, Dick and Leah Bowers, Mark Clark. And that continued up until sometime in the 90s. Maybe I didn't research that particular date, when again, we found, just like with the overnights we were talking earlier, we found the interest of that type of programming was waning.
Right.
And so the decision was made to begin to bring in more nationally known groups again, or more professional, if you want to call it that, groups that could come in, and schools had so many other commitments and schedule requirements. Right. So it then morphed into once a semester, and they would do 2 or 3 weeks of programming across the region. And so, that continues today.
Yeah. Well, man, there's so much that has happened over the years throughout the history. I know we're gonna spend some more time talking about some stories and whatnot of just God's miraculous work throughout this ministry here. And so we're going to hit that the next time that we're back together.
Yes.
But Roy, man, thank you so much for jumping in with us, for bringing us up to speed on everything everything that has gone on, because it's so important for us to reflect on the past and remember what God has done. I think of Samuel setting up the Ebenezer stone, and saying, "This far the Lord has helped us."
Yeah, and that's was my philosophy. You can't work and minister always looking back, but you can't forget where you came from.
That's right. Absolutely.
There's an old saying that says you can take the man out of the mountains, but you can't take the mountain out of the man.
Yeah,
which is something I always use to describe Mr. Franklin. But it's true, and you can't forget your history as you look forward. So you got to find that right balance.
The reason we trust that God will be faithful today is because he's always been faithful in the past.
Exactly.
And we can know he'll be faithful tomorrow if the Lord wills. So, Roy, thank you again for sitting in with us. We appreciate it.
Look forward to it.
We remind them again about those overnights real quick, Lee, if you don't care. I'm just kind of putting you on the spot here as we get ready to sign off. We got overnights coming up in the next few weeks that you need to be part of.
Yep, so 4th and 5th grade, we've got 2 weekends that you can come. One of them is October 18th and 19th. The next one is the October 25th and 26th. And then 6th through 8th grade, you all can come on November 1st and 2nd. So those are coming up really quick. Again, they fill up quick, so get on there, get signed up, and we'll see you all at camp here soon.
All right, guys, have a great week, and we'll see you back here on November 1st.
Yeah.
For some more chats with Roy.
To be continued.
Yeah, I know. We got one more good episode coming up, man, so you guys don't miss it. All right, we'll talk to you later.